Have you ever wondered why deep thinkers often feel set apart from the rest of the world, as if their minds live in places others rarely visit? The psychology of deep thinkers is not simply about intelligence or knowledge, it is about the way the unconscious shapes perception, meaning, and inner life. Carl Jung observed that those who think deeply are often guided not by the surface of life, but by the archetypal patterns and hidden truths beneath it. They wrestle with questions of existence, purpose, and the mysteries of the soul, while others are satisfied with appearances. But this gift also comes with burdens, feelings of isolation, inner conflict, or being misunderstood. In this lecture, we will uncover Jung's insights into why deep thinkers see the world differently, how their relationship with the unconscious shapes creativity and wisdom, and what it means to carry the responsibility of thought in a world that often prefers distraction to reflection. If you have ever felt the weight and wonder of thinking too deeply, this message will show you why Jung believed that such minds are both a challenge and a treasure to humanity. Carl Jung's view of deep thinkers cannot be understood without first considering his broader vision of the psyche. For Jung, human consciousness is not merely a collection of rational thoughts and intellectual reasoning, but a dynamic interplay between the conscious ego, the personal unconscious, and the collective unconscious. What sets deep thinkers apart from those who engage only with the surface of reality is their orientation toward the unconscious and the archetypal forces that dwell there. While most people live primarily at the level of everyday concerns, routines, social interactions, and immediate goals, deep thinkers are drawn to the depths beneath these appearances. They cannot be content with surface explanations. Instead, they seek patterns, meaning, and truth that point beyond what is visible. Jung recognized that this orientation toward the unconscious gave deep thinkers a distinct psychological makeup, one that is often both a gift and a challenge. To understand this, it is helpful to reflect on Jung's concept of archetypes. Archetypes are universal patterns or primordial images that reside in the collective unconscious, shaping human experience across cultures and history. They appear in myths, symbols, dreams, and spiritual traditions, revealing the underlying structures of the human psyche. While many people interact with archetypes unconsciously, deep thinkers are more aware of these forces, either intuitively or consciously. They notice the symbolic dimension of life, interpreting events not just as random occurrences but as expressions of deeper patterns. For example, where others might see an ordinary conflict at work, a deep thinker may recognize archetypal themes of power, rivalry, or the hero's journey. Where others see coincidence, the deep thinker may perceive synchronicity, what Jung described as meaningful connection between inner and outer events. This orientation allows them to live at a greater depth, seeing life as more than a sequence of practical tasks. Jung also noted that deep thinkers are often guided by intuition, one of the primary psychological functions he identified. Intuition, unlike sensation, is not focused on what is immediately present but on possibilities, patterns, and meanings that extend beyond the obvious. The deep thinker perceives not only what is happening but what it implies, what it connects to, and what it symbolizes. This way of perceiving is naturally aligned with the unconscious, which communicates through symbols, images, and intuition rather than through logical argument. As a result, deep thinkers often feel as though their thoughts are not entirely their own but arise from a deeper source. Jung himself described his own creative work as something that came to him rather than from him, as if he were a vessel for ideas emerging from the collective unconscious. This connection to the unconscious gives deep thinkers both their strength and their difficulty. On one hand, it allows them to generate profound insights, to create works of art, philosophy, or spirituality that touch universal truths. On the other hand, it can overwhelm them, because the unconscious is vast and not always gentle. Dreams, visions, and intuitions may bring insights, but they may also bring confusion, paradox, or even darkness. Jung emphasized that the unconscious contains both light and shadow, both creative potential and destructive forces. Deep thinkers, by venturing into this territory, expose themselves to both. Unlike others who avoid or deny the unconscious, deep thinkers wrestle with it directly, and this shapes their psychological experience. Another aspect of Jung's view is the role of individuation in the lives of deep thinkers. Individuation is the process of becoming whole, of integrating the conscious and unconscious into a balanced self. For deep thinkers, this process often takes on heightened importance, because their contact with the unconscious makes them aware of the fragments and conflicts within the psyche. They are not satisfied to live in denial or distraction. They feel compelled to bring these conflicts into awareness, to reconcile opposites, and to move toward wholeness. Jung considered this not only a personal task but also a contribution to humanity, because each individuated person helps heal the collective unconscious by embodying integration. Deep thinkers, therefore, are guided by a sense of purpose that transcends personal gain. They are drawn to psychological and spiritual growth because their very makeup demands it. That the way deep thinkers relate to knowledge itself reflects this connection to the unconscious. For many people, knowledge is about gathering facts, solving immediate problems, or advancing practical goals. For deep thinkers, knowledge is more existential. They are less concerned with information for its own sake and more with wisdom, the integration of knowledge into meaning and purpose. This orientation aligns with Jung's distinction between the ego and the self. The ego is concerned with control, security, and external validation, while the self represents the larger totality of the psyche, aiming for harmony and wholeness. Deep thinkers tend to orient toward the self, whether consciously or not. Their pursuit of wisdom, meaning, and universal truth reflects the self's drive toward integration. Even when they cannot articulate it, their inner compass is tuned to the archetypal patterns that pull them toward deeper understanding. One might ask why deep thinkers are not more common, if these archetypal forces are universal. Jung would say that while the unconscious is present in everyone, not everyone has the same sensitivity to it. Some people are naturally attuned to sensation and practical reality, and they excel in living effectively at the surface level. Others, by temperament or by life experience, are drawn inward, compelled to reflect, analyze, and interpret. Jung recognized typological differences in personality thinking, feeling, intuition, and sensation as dominant functions that shape how individuals engage with reality. Deep thinkers often combine thinking and intuition, allowing them to analyze while also seeing beyond the visible. This orientation is less common, and it often sets them apart from the majority, who are more comfortable in immediate, practical concerns. It is also important to consider how deep thinkers experience the world emotionally. Because they engage with the unconscious, they often feel the weight of collective human struggles. They are sensitive to suffering, to existential questions, and to the mystery of life and death. While others may distract themselves from these questions, deep thinkers cannot. They carry within themselves the archetypal weight of humanity's search for meaning. This can lead to feelings of alienation, as though they live in a world that does not understand their concerns. Yet it also gives them a sense of kinship with the timeless human quest for truth. Jung himself often felt like an outsider, aware of realities that others ignored. He saw this as both a burden and a calling, the mark of one who is in touch with deeper layers of the psyche. Another feature of Jung's view is that deep thinkers often become mediators between the unconscious and the collective. Because they are attuned to archetypes, they can articulate truths that others feel but cannot express. This is why poets, philosophers, mystics, and visionaries have always held a special place in human history. They give voice to what lies beneath the surface, shaping culture, religion, and art in ways that resonate across time. Jung himself was such a mediator, translating his encounters with the unconscious into a psychological framework that continues to influence millions. Deep thinkers, in this sense, are not only guided by the unconscious, but also serve as its interpreters, bringing hidden truths into the light of collective consciousness. This role, however, is not without its challenges. Jung acknowledged that the unconscious can overwhelm those who open themselves fully to it. Without balance, deep thinkers can become lost in abstraction, detached from practical reality, or burdened by insights they cannot integrate. This is why individuation is so crucial. It provides the structure to hold the vastness of the unconscious, without being consumed by it. Deep thinkers must ground themselves, finding ways to live in the world even while exploring its depths. Jung emphasized the importance of grounding through relationships, work, and creativity, so that the insights gained from the unconscious can be embodied in life rather than remaining abstract or destructive. Jung's view of deep thinkers highlights their orientation toward the unconscious, their sensitivity to archetypal patterns, and their role as mediators of hidden truths. Guided not merely by surface reality but by the deeper structures of the psyche, they live in a world of meaning, symbolism, and integration. Their path is not easy, because the unconscious carries both light and darkness, but it is essential for the growth of humanity. By engaging with the unconscious, deep thinkers uncover truths that others cannot, offering wisdom, creativity, and transformation to the collective. This is why Jung saw their psychology as unique, marked by both the burden of depth and the treasure of insight, forever guided by forces beyond the ordinary mind. The tension between deep thinking and feelings of isolation or being misunderstood by society is one of the defining struggles that Carl Jung often observed in individuals whose inner life took them beyond the ordinary surface of existence. To think deeply is not simply to process information more thoroughly, it is to live in a different relationship to the world, one that is shaped by questions of meaning, truth, and purpose that many around us would prefer to avoid. The deep thinker cannot be satisfied with superficial explanations, with traditions accepted without examination, or with the fleeting pleasures that occupy most people's minds. Instead, they are driven inward, pulled toward the depths of their own psyche and toward the mysteries of life that cannot be explained away with casual answers. While this path leads to profound insight and wisdom, it often places them at odds with the collective mindset of their time, creating a sense of separation that can manifest as loneliness, alienation, or the painful feeling of being unseen. Jung was deeply aware of this paradox. On one hand, deep thinkers serve an essential role for the development of both culture and consciousness, acting as visionaries, interpreters, and guides who articulate truths that humanity needs in order to grow. On the other hand, precisely because their concerns are not the same as the masses, they can become estranged from society, misunderstood, or even rejected. History is full of examples of prophets, mystics, philosophers, and innovators who were dismissed or ridiculed in their time, only to be revered later for the depth of their insights. Jung himself often described the loneliness that comes with individuation, the process by which an individual integrates their unconscious and becomes whole. This path, he explained, leads a person away from collective conventions and toward a truth that is uniquely their own. While it brings authenticity and inner peace, it also increases the distance between the individual and the collective, since not everyone is prepared to understand or accept that depth. For the deep thinker, isolation often arises because their questions strike at the foundations of collective assumptions. Most people are content to live within the frameworks given to them by culture, religion, or tradition. They find comfort in conformity, in shared routines and widely accepted beliefs. But the deep thinker cannot help but question, examine, and search beyond what is given. They ask why things are the way they are, whether the values of their society are true, and what lies beneath the accepted narratives. These questions make others uncomfortable because they destabilize the certainty of the group. As a result, the deep thinker may be regarded as strange, difficult, or even threatening, when in reality they are simply seeking a more authentic engagement with life. Jung saw this tension as inevitable, because the process of bringing unconscious material into consciousness often reveals truths that the collective is not yet ready to face. The sense of being misunderstood can also come from the way deep thinkers experience the world differently, because they are oriented toward the unconscious and the archetypal. Their language and concerns often revolve around symbols, meanings, and inner realities that others overlook. When a deep thinker describes a dream as a revelation, or interprets a life event as a synchronicity, others may dismiss it as fanciful or irrational. Yet for the deep thinker, such experiences are profoundly real, carrying significance that cannot be reduced to material explanations. Jung himself faced criticism for his exploration of alchemy, mysticism, and spirituality, subjects many of his contemporaries dismissed as But for Jung, these symbolic systems were languages of the unconscious, essential for understanding the full breadth of human psychology. Similarly, deep thinkers in any age are often misunderstood because their frame of reference extends beyond the material or conventional. They live in a world where symbols breathe, where meaning is everywhere, and where inner truth is just as important as external facts. Another source of isolation is the inner conflict that deep thinkers experience. When they realize how few share their concerns, the longing for connection is universal, and even the most solitary mind desires to be understood. But when surrounded by people who are uninterested in questions of meaning or who prefer to live at the surface, the deep thinker can feel profoundly alone. They may attempt to share their insights, only to be met with indifference or even hostility. This rejection deepens the sense of being an outsider, someone who lives in a reality invisible to others. Jung spoke often about this loneliness, describing individuation as a path that requires courage because it leads away from the comfort of belonging to the herd. The individuated person must learn to bear this loneliness, trusting that authenticity is more valuable than conformity, even if it comes at the cost of social ease. Yet this very isolation also creates the space for the depth that defines them. Without the distractions of constant conformity, deep thinkers are able to turn inward, to dwell in silence, to wrestle with their own psyche and with the archetypes that shape existence. Jung himself spent years in intense inner exploration, engaging with dreams, visions, and dialogues with unconscious figures, practices that many around him would not have understood. These solitary experiences became the foundation of his contributions to psychology. Similarly, the isolation of deep thinkers is often the womb of their creativity and insight. What feels like separation from others is also a connection to the unconscious, a relationship that demands solitude to be cultivated. Still, the pain of being misunderstood remains. Deep thinkers often feel the weight of carrying truths they cannot easily share, or of seeing patterns that others refuse to acknowledge. This burden can lead to frustration, or even despair, especially if the thinker begins to doubt the value of their insights. Jung recognized this danger and emphasized the importance of grounding oneself, of finding ways to embody insights in creative or practical form rather than remaining trapped in abstraction. By expressing their inner life through art, writing, teaching, or other forms of creation, deep thinkers bridge the gap between themselves and society, making their insights accessible to others. In this way, what once isolated them can become the very thing that connects them, as their unique perspective contributes to the collective growth of humanity. The tension between deep thinking and isolation is also mirrored in myths and stories that Jung studied. Many archetypal figures, the wise old man, the prophet, the hero, spend part of their journey in solitude, withdrawn from the world. This solitude is not a punishment, but a stage of transformation, where the individual gains wisdom that can later be shared. The prophet retreats to the desert, the hero descends into the underworld, the mystic enters the wilderness. These stories reflect the psychological reality that deep insight often requires separation from the collective. Jung saw this pattern as universal, an archetypal truth that every deep thinker enacts in their own way. The challenge is to return from isolation with gifts for the community, rather than remaining forever apart. In addition, society itself sometimes resists deep thinkers because their presence highlights the shallowness of collective life. To be in the company of someone who continually questions, who refuses to accept easy answers, can feel threatening to those who prefer comfort. Thus, deep thinkers may find themselves marginalized, not because of personal failure, but because their depth exposes what others would rather avoid. Jung pointed out that society often fears what it does not understand, and so those who live by deeper truths are cast as outsiders. But he also believed that over time, these very individuals shape the course of culture by introducing new ways of seeing and new levels of consciousness. What isolates them in the present may become their greatest contribution in the future. It is also important to note that not all isolation is externally imposed. Sometimes deep thinkers choose solitude intentionally, recognizing that the noise of society makes it difficult to hear the voice of the unconscious. Jung himself valued solitude and believed that every person must learn to listen inwardly. For the deep thinker, this often means withdrawing from the constant chatter of the external world in order to cultivate an inner dialogue. Though this choice can lead to feelings of loneliness, it also provides the fertile ground where depth is born. Over time, many deep thinkers come to value their solitude, even if it sets them apart, because they recognize that it is in silence and isolation that the deepest truths reveal themselves. Ultimately, the tension between deep thinking and isolation is not something to be eliminated, but something to be understood and embraced. It is part of the path of the deep thinker to live on the margins of collective understanding, to carry insights that may not be immediately welcomed, and to endure the loneliness that comes with being oriented toward the unconscious. But within this tension lies the very source of their power. The isolation that separates them also connects them to something greater, a deeper reality that transcends the collective mind. And though they may be misunderstood by many, they are understood by the archetypal patterns they serve, by the unconscious itself, which calls them into depth. This is why Jung saw the path of the deep thinker as both a burden and a calling, a tension that must be borne with courage, but that ultimately enriches both the individual and the world. The role of introspection, reflection, and individuation in shaping the inner life of deep thinkers is central to understanding how Carl Jung viewed the psychology of those who seek meaning beneath the surface of things. Deep thinkers are not content to live only in the external world, where appearances, routines, and conventions dominate. Their orientation draws them inward, into the world of the psyche, where symbols, dreams, and unconscious forces dwell. Jung saw introspection not as mere self-absorption, but as a vital method of entering into dialogue with the unconscious, a way of uncovering hidden truths that shape the whole of one's life. Reflection allows the deep thinker to pause, to hold an experience in the mind long enough to discover the patterns and archetypes it contains. And individuation, the process of integrating conscious and unconscious elements into wholeness, gives direction and purpose to this inner journey. Taken together, these practices form the foundation of how deep thinkers develop a life that is rich, meaningful, and profoundly different from that of those who remain satisfied with existence. Introspection is the starting point. For Jung, turning inward was not simply optional, it was necessary for psychological growth. The unconscious does not reveal itself through external observation alone. It speaks through symbols, dreams, intuitions, and emotions. Deep thinkers, by nature, are drawn to these inner expressions. They replay conversations in their minds, not out of insecurity, but to extract meaning from subtle cues. They analyze their own emotional responses, asking why they felt irritation, sadness, or awe in a given situation. They study their dreams, recognizing that images, which seem random, often carry profound messages from the unconscious. This habit of introspection allows them to live in dialogue with themselves, continually learning from the inner currents that shape their outer lives. Jung himself practiced this deeply, keeping records of his dreams, visions, and inner dialogues, which became the foundation of his later theories. Yet introspection alone can become a trap if not balanced with reflection. Reflection is the process of interpreting what arises in introspection, making sense of it within a larger framework of meaning. A person might notice a recurring dream of being chased, for example, but without reflection they may dismiss it as random. The deep thinker, however, pauses to consider what it symbolizes. They may reflect that the pursuer represents an aspect of the shadow that is sown part of themselves they have avoided facing. Through reflection, they recognize that the dream is not about external danger but about an inner reality. This kind of reflective process transforms raw introspection into wisdom. It prevents the deep thinker from drowning in self-analysis and instead helps them extract the universal lessons embedded in their experiences. Jung often insisted that symbols, whether in dreams or myths, had to be reflected upon in order to reveal their archetypal meaning. For the deep thinker, reflection is the art of seeing beyond the literal into the symbolic. Individuation then gives the journey its direction. Without individuation, introspection and reflection can remain fragmented, producing insights but not integration. Jung described individuation as the process by which a person becomes whole, reconciling the conscious and unconscious, the ego and the shadow, the rational and the irrational. Deep thinkers are especially attuned to this process because their inner lives constantly confront them with contradictions and opposites. They notice, for instance, that they may appear confident yet secretly feel insecure, or that they value compassion yet harbor resentment. Individuation does not mean eliminating these conflicts, but integrating them into a larger unity where opposites can coexist. For Jung, wholeness is not perfection but balance, and deep thinkers, through their introspective and reflective habits, are guided toward this integration. Their inner life is shaped by a continual movement toward individuation, even if they cannot name it as such. The process of individuation often begins with shadow work, where the thinker confronts the parts of themselves they have denied or repressed. Through introspection, they notice when they react strongly to others, and through reflection, they realize that these reactions often point to disowned qualities within themselves. A deep thinker who despises arrogance in others may, upon reflection, discover their own suppressed desire to be recognized. Integrating this realization through individuation, they learn to acknowledge and accept this desire without being controlled by it. In this way, the shadow ceases to sabotage them unconsciously, and becomes a source of strength. The integration of the shadow is one of the hallmarks of the deep thinker's journey, and it shapes their inner life with authenticity and depth. Another dimension of individuation for deep thinkers is the integration of anima and animus, Jung's terms for the inner feminine in men and the inner masculine in women. Deep thinkers often find themselves wrestling with these inner figures, which appear in dreams, fantasies, and relationships. Through introspection, they may notice patterns in how they relate to others, and through reflection, they come to see that these patterns reveal unconscious dynamics of anima or animus. Individuation requires them to integrate these figures, balancing rationality with intuition, strength with sensitivity, logic with imagination. For Jung, this balance was essential to wholeness, and for the deep thinker, it adds richness and complexity to the inner life. They become capable of holding multiple perspectives, of drawing on both masculine and feminine energies, and of living with a greater sense of harmony. The role of individuation also includes confronting archetypes directly. Deep thinkers often feel drawn to archetypal experiences such as the hero's journey, the wise old man, or the great mother. These are not just abstract symbols, they are living forces within the psyche. Through introspection, the deep thinker senses their presence. Through reflection, they recognize their patterns, and through individuation, they integrate their power. For example, a deep thinker who feels compelled to withdraw into solitude may, upon reflection, realize they are enacting the archetype of the hermit, a stage of inner transformation. By integrating this archetype consciously, they gain wisdom, without losing their connection to the world. Such awareness gives shape and coherence to their inner life, allowing them to live not just as individuals but as participants in universal human patterns. This process of introspection, reflection, and individuation shapes the daily existence of deep thinkers in subtle ways. Their conversations often carry a reflective tone, as they draw connections others miss. Their journals are filled with symbols, questions, and insights that give voice to their inner explorations. Their decisions are less about practicality alone and more about alignment with meaning and authenticity. Even their struggles, periods of doubt, confusion, or loneliness are integrated into their growth, because they see them as part of the individuation journey. Jung often warned that individuation is not a path of comfort but of transformation, and deep thinkers embody this truth. Their willingness to turn inward, to reflect, and to integrate makes their lives more challenging but also more profound. One of the difficulties deep thinkers face is that society often undervalues introspection. The modern world prizes speed, efficiency, and external achievement, while deep thinking requires slowness, patience, and attention to the inner life. This mismatch can make deep thinkers feel out of place, as though their orientation is at odds with the demands of their environment. Yet, their very resistance to the superficial is what allows them to preserve depth in a world that often forgets it. Jung believed that such individuals are crucial for the health of culture, because they preserve contact with the unconscious and ensure that meaning does not vanish in the rush of modernity. Their introspection and individuation may set them apart, but it also makes them carriers of wisdom that others may one day recognize as vital. The practice of reflection also shapes how deep thinkers view suffering, where many see suffering as meaningless or something to be avoided at all costs. Deep thinkers reflect on its meaning. They ask what lesson or transformation is hidden within pain. Jung himself often wrote that suffering is one of the greatest teachers, because it forces the ego to confront limits and opens the door to deeper integration. Through reflection, deep thinkers transform suffering into insight, using it as a catalyst for individuation. This does not make suffering easy, but it gives it a purpose that allows them to endure it with resilience. Their ability to find meaning in difficulty is one of the ways their inner life becomes rich. Despite the challenges it entails, dreams, too, play a central role in the deep thinker's introspective journey. Jung believed that dreams are direct communications from the unconscious, offering symbols and narratives that reveal hidden aspects of the self. Deep thinkers often pay careful attention to their dreams, writing them down, analyzing recurring symbols, and reflecting on their relevance to waking life. Through this practice, they strengthen their connection to the unconscious, allowing individuation to unfold more fully. Dreams provide guidance, warn of dangers, reveal hidden desires, and connect the dreamer to archetypal themes. For deep thinkers, this nightly dialogue with the unconscious becomes an essential part of their inner life, deepening their awareness and shaping their sense of identity. In sum, the combination of introspection, reflection, and individuation shapes the inner life of deep thinkers into something uniquely profound. They live in continual dialogue with the unconscious, seeking to uncover its messages through careful observation and interpretation. They reflect on their experiences, not just for themselves, but for the universal patterns they reveal. And they walk the path of individuation, striving for wholeness by integrating the many facets of the psyche. This orientation sets them apart from those who remain satisfied with the surface. but it also gives them access to wisdom, creativity, and authenticity that enriches both their own lives and the collective. The inner life of the deep thinker is therefore not a retreat from reality, but an engagement with its deepest layers. A journey guided by Jung's conviction that true transformation begins within. How deep thinkers channel unconscious material into creativity, philosophy, and spiritual insight is one of the most profound aspects of Carl Jung's psychology. Jung believed that the unconscious is not merely a storehouse of forgotten experiences or repressed emotions, but a living wellspring of symbols, images, and archetypes that can shape human life in powerful ways. For most people, this unconscious material remains hidden or emerges only indirectly through dreams or fleeting intuitions. But for deep thinkers, there is a heightened sensitivity to these inner currents, and they often find ways to bring the unconscious into conscious expression. This can manifest in artistic creativity, in the formulation of philosophical systems, or in the development of spiritual insights that illuminate the mysteries of existence, rather than being overwhelmed by the unconscious or ignoring it altogether. Deep thinkers learn to serve as mediators, translating what lies in the depths into forms that can be shared with the world. Creativity is perhaps the most immediate channel through which unconscious material emerges. Jung himself devoted much attention to studying the role of the unconscious in art, literature, and myth. He argued that the greatest works of art are not simply products of individual talent, but expressions of archetypal patterns that arise from the collective unconscious. This is why such works resonate across cultures and generations. They speak to something universal within the human psyche. Deep thinkers who are artists often describe their creative process as something that comes through them rather than from them. Poets speak of inspiration as if it were a visitation, painters describe visions that appear before the brush touches the canvas, and musicians hear melodies in dreams or moments of silence. For Jung, these experiences demonstrate that creativity is a dialogue between the conscious mind and the unconscious, with the deep thinker serving as a channel for expression. In philosophy, too, unconscious material plays a crucial role. Philosophers throughout history have often been deep thinkers who wrestled with questions of existence, meaning, and truth that go beyond empirical observation. Jung would argue that their ideas are shaped not only by rational thought but also by archetypal influences. The concept of the eternal return in Nietzsche, the idea of the forms in Plato, or the notion of the Tao in Eastern philosophy are all examples of insights that reflect archetypal realities. These are not mere intellectual constructs. They are expressions of universal patterns that arise from the unconscious. Deep thinkers are able to sense these patterns intuitively and give them form through conceptual frameworks. Their philosophy becomes a way of making the unconscious visible, of articulating truths that are felt before they are reasoned. Spiritual insight is another channel through which deep thinkers bring unconscious material to the surface. Jung saw religion and spirituality as natural expressions of the psyche, rooted in archetypes such as the self, the great mother, the hero, or the wise old man. For deep thinkers with a spiritual orientation, encounters with the unconscious often take the form of visions, mystical experiences, or profound intuitions of meaning. These experiences are not simply personal. They connect the individual to the collective unconscious and to the archetypal dimensions of existence. Mystics, saints, and visionaries throughout history have often described their insights as revelations given to them, and Jung interpreted such experiences as the psyche's way of expressing archetypal truths. Deep thinkers who are spiritually inclined become interpreters of these truths, articulating them through teachings, rituals, or practices that guide others toward inner transformation. Dreams are one of the primary ways unconscious material surfaces, and deep thinkers often pay particular attention to them. Jung described dreams as the royal road to the unconscious, offering symbolic messages that reveal what lies beneath the surface of consciousness. For deep thinkers, dreams are not random or meaningless but rich sources of inspiration. Many artists, writers, and inventors have received creative ideas from dreams, and many spiritual seekers have experienced guidance through dream symbols. By reflecting on their dreams and integrating their meanings, deep thinkers channel unconscious material into creative works, philosophical insights, or spiritual practices. This is not merely a private exercise, but a way of connecting personal experience to universal truths Jung's own life offers. A clear example of how unconscious material can fuel creativity and insight. During a period of intense personal crisis, he engaged in what he later called his confrontation with the unconscious, recording his visions, dialogues, and inner images in what became known as the Red Book. These experiences, which many would have dismissed as fantasies, became the foundation of his later theories of archetypes, individuation, and the collective unconscious. Jung did not suppress or ignore the material that surfaced. He allowed it to guide him, and in doing so, he transformed it into a psychology that continues to shape our understanding of the human mind. His example shows how deep thinkers, when willing to face the unconscious, can channel its content into works of lasting significance. The relationship between the unconscious and creativity is not always easy. Jung warned that unconscious material can be overwhelming, even dangerous, if it is not integrated properly. Some artists or thinkers may become consumed by the images and energies that arise, losing their grounding in reality. This is why Jung emphasized the importance of individuation, the process of integrating unconscious content into the conscious personality. For deep thinkers, this means not only receiving insights or inspirations, but also working to embody them in a balanced way. A vision may inspire a great work of art, but without integration, it can also destabilize the individual. Thus, the channeling of unconscious material requires discipline, reflection, and a commitment to psychological growth. Another important aspect is the role of symbols. The unconscious communicates in symbols rather than direct concepts, and deep thinkers often become interpreters of this symbolic language. A dream of water, for example, may symbolize the depths of the unconscious. A vision of a tree may represent growth, rootedness, or the axis between heaven and earth. Artists and writers use symbols to give form to these meanings, while philosophers use metaphors and analogies, and spiritual teachers use myths and rituals. The symbol acts as a bridge between the unconscious and the conscious, allowing what is hidden to be expressed in a form that can be shared. Jung believed that working with symbols was essential for psychological health, because it connected the individual to the deeper layers of the psyche. For deep thinkers, this symbolic orientation is natural, and it shapes the way they create, think, and teach. Synchronicity is another way the unconscious breaks into conscious life, and deep thinkers are especially attuned to it. Synchronicity refers to meaningful coincidences that reveal a connection between inner states and outer events. While many dismiss coincidences as chance, deep thinkers often sense their symbolic significance. They may interpret a chance meeting, a repeated number, or an unexpected event as a message from the unconscious or from the larger order of reality. These synchronicities often inspire creative works, philosophical reflections, or spiritual practices, because they reveal the unity between inner and outer worlds. For Jung, synchronicity was evidence that the unconscious is not limited to the individual but connects to a larger web of meaning. Deep thinkers, by noticing and interpreting these events, channel their significance into insights that expand our understanding of reality. The way deep thinkers use unconscious material also differs depending on their temperament. Some may express it through art, painting archetypal images that capture collective truths. Others may channel it into philosophy, developing systems of thought that articulate the symbolic patterns of existence. Still others may turn toward spirituality, interpreting their visions and intuitions as guidance for living. But in each case, the unconscious provides the raw material, and the deep thinker serves as the interpreter, shaping it into a form that can be shared. This is why their work often feels timeless or universal, because it does not come solely from their individual mind, but from the collective unconscious that belongs to all humanity. Their challenge for deep thinkers is to balance their inner experiences with external life. While the unconscious offers immense richness, it can also isolate those who dwell too long in its depths. Jung insisted that the goal was not to escape into fantasy but to bring unconscious material into practical expression. For an artist, this means creating works that speak to others. For a philosopher, it means articulating ideas that can be debated and understood. For a spiritual thinker, it means guiding others toward transformation. A deep thinker's task is not only to experience the unconscious but to translate it into contributions that enrich the collective. In this sense, their creativity, philosophy, and spirituality are not private pursuits but public gifts, shaping culture and consciousness. Ultimately, what distinguishes deep thinkers is their willingness to engage with the unconscious rather than ignore it. Where many resist or repress its contents, they open themselves to its messages, even when they are difficult or unsettling. Through introspection, they notice its presence, Through creativity, they give it form. Through philosophy, they articulate its patterns. And through spirituality, they embody its truths. This channeling of unconscious material is not easy, but it is what gives their lives depth and their contributions lasting value. Jung saw this as a path of both danger and promise, a calling that requires courage but that offers profound rewards. By engaging with the unconscious in this way, deep thinkers help humanity connect with the deeper dimensions of existence, reminding us that life is not only what we see on the surface but also what speaks to us from the depths. The responsibility and burden of carrying deeper awareness in a world that resists reflection is perhaps the most defining mark of the deep thinker, and Carl Jung understood this tension with remarkable clarity. To carry a heightened awareness of the unconscious, of archetypal forces, and of the hidden truths that lie beneath ordinary life is both a gift and a weight. It allows deep thinkers to perceive connections, to find meaning where others see none, and to interpret experiences in ways that bring wisdom and transformation. Yet it also isolates them, because most people are not willing to look so deeply into themselves or into life. The world often prefers distraction, conformity, and explanations over the uncomfortable truths that come from reflection. Deep thinkers, therefore, are burdened not only with the insights they carry but also with the loneliness of being surrounded by those who resist them. Jung saw this dynamic not as accidental but as an inevitable consequence of individuation, the process by which an individual becomes whole by integrating the unconscious. Individuation separates the thinker from the collective, giving them access to truths the collective may deny. And with that access comes both responsibility and weight. The responsibility lies first in the need to integrate what they discover within themselves. When unconscious material rises to the surface, whether through dreams, visions, or moments of intuition, the deep thinker must take it seriously. Ignoring it or repressing it leads to fragmentation and conflict, but integrating it demands effort, honesty, and courage. Jung often described this as a kind of moral responsibility to the psyche. If one is given awareness of a truth, one cannot simply return to ignorance without consequence. For example, a deep thinker who becomes aware of their shadow cannot continue projecting it onto others without inner conflict. The awareness itself demands integration. In this sense, carrying deeper awareness is a burden, because it continually requires self-examination and growth. Where others may live in the ease of denial, the deep thinker must walk the difficult path of authenticity, confronting truths that are often uncomfortable. But the responsibility does not end with the self. Jung also emphasized that the individuation of the individual contributes to the collective. Each person who integrates their unconscious not only heals themselves but also lessens the burden on humanity as a whole, because they reduce the collective projections that fuel conflict, prejudice, and division. Deep thinkers, therefore, carry a responsibility to bring their insights into the world in some form, whether through art, teaching, leadership, or quiet example. Their awareness makes them mediators between the unconscious and the collective, interpreters of truths that others cannot see. Yet this role is often resisted by society, which prefers to maintain its illusions rather than confront deeper realities. This creates the painful experience of offering wisdom that is rejected, of seeing truths that others deny, and of carrying a vision that feels too heavy to share. The burden of deeper awareness also includes the emotional weight of seeing more than others. Deep thinkers notice the suffering, contradictions, and hypocrisies of life in ways that can feel overwhelming. Where others are content to gloss over injustice or distract themselves from existential questions, deep thinkers cannot. They feel the dissonance between the world as it is and the world as it could be, and this awareness often brings sorrow or frustration. Jung wrote about the wounded healer archetype, the idea that those who see deeply often carry wounds themselves, precisely because their sensitivity exposes them to the pain of existence. For the deep thinker, awareness is never neutral. It comes with an emotional depth that can be heavy to bear. There is also the burden of communication. Deep thinkers often struggle to convey their insights in ways others can understand, because their awareness is rooted in symbols, archetypes, and unconscious material. Their language can seem strange, abstract, or threatening to those who live only on the surface. This can lead to misunderstandings, rejection, or even hostility. Jung himself experienced this when his explorations of alchemy, dreams, and mysticism were dismissed by many as yet he insisted that these were essential for understanding the psyche. Similarly, deep thinkers must carry the burden of articulating truths that others resist, often at the cost of their own acceptance. This responsibility requires patience, creativity, and resilience, as they translate inner awareness into forms that can be received without diluting its meaning. Another dimension of the responsibility of deeper awareness is ethical. Once a person sees into the dynamics of the psyche, they have a choice about how to use that knowledge. Awareness of projection, manipulation, or unconscious drives can be used to heal or to exploit. Jung warned that the misuse of psychological insight could be destructive, and so deep thinkers bear the burden of using their awareness wisely. They must continually examine their motives, ensuring that their insights serve growth rather than control. This ethical responsibility can feel heavy, because it requires constant vigilance. Yet it also defines the dignity of the deep thinker, whose task is not only to see but to use vision for the sake of wholeness. The world's resistance to reflection intensifies the burden. In a culture that values speed, distraction, and consumption, the reflective pace of the deep thinker can feel out of step. The questions they ask about meaning, mortality, and the unconscious can seem irrelevant or even uncomfortable to those focused on practical concerns. This resistance creates a gap between the deep thinker and the collective, making them feel like outsiders. Jung described individuation as a path that necessarily moves one away from the herd, requiring courage to stand alone. For the deep thinker, this means bearing the solitude that comes with carrying truths that others do not want to face. Yet solitude, while difficult, also provides the space for depth. It is within this tension of being rejected by the collective, yet nourished by the unconscious, that the deep thinker's inner life develops. Another aspect of the burden is the need to balance depth with ordinary life. While the unconscious offers profound insights, one cannot live entirely in the world of symbols and archetypes without losing touch with practical reality. Deep thinkers often feel torn between their inner world and the demands of daily relationships, responsibilities. Jung emphasized the importance of grounding oneself, of embodying insights in concrete life rather than escaping into fantasy. For the deep thinker, this balance is part of the responsibility of deeper awareness, to live fully in the world while remaining connected to the unconscious. This balance prevents them from becoming isolated or overwhelmed and allows their insights to contribute meaningfully to society. The burden of deeper awareness can also manifest as a sense of destiny. Deep thinkers often feel that their insights are not simply personal but part of a larger calling. Jung described this as the voice of the self, the deeper center of the psyche that guides individuation. When the self calls, the individual feels compelled to follow, even when the path is difficult. For deep thinkers, this can create a sense of being chosen or tasked with a mission, whether to articulate truths, create art, or guide others. While this sense of destiny can be inspiring, it also adds weight, because it demands sacrifice and perseverance. They cannot simply live for comfort. Their awareness insists on purpose, yet within the burden lies the possibility of transformation. Jung believed that the deep thinker's struggle with awareness and resistance serves a larger purpose. It expands human consciousness. By carrying awareness that others resist, they prepare the way for future generations to accept it. What isolates them today may become common knowledge tomorrow. Their responsibility, then, is not only to themselves but to the unfolding story of humanity's growth. This long view gives meaning to their burden, allowing them to see their isolation not as failure but as part of a larger pattern. In this way, the responsibility and burden of deeper awareness becomes both a cross to bear and a source of strength. It demands that deep thinkers confront themselves, integrate their unconscious, communicate difficult truths, and live authentically even in the face of resistance. It weighs on them emotionally and socially, but it also shapes their inner life with depth, authenticity, and purpose. For Jung, this tension was unavoidable, because individuation always separates the individual from the collective, but it is precisely in bearing this burden that the deep thinker fulfills their role as a mediator between the unconscious and the world, as a carrier of truths that humanity needs, and as a witness to the deeper realities of existence.